Hi, Conor Crickmore here of Neversink Farm, and this is the Weed-Free Farm Part 2. We're going to take a closer look at what's going on and what this is about and what this means. In the last Weed-Free Farm, I kind of gave an overview of the tools I use, about making sure we cultivate every piece of bare soil, which tools to use, that we have straight rows is very important, and that the rows are parallel so that the tools, right, whatever width you're using, will fit in those rows. Now I want to show what's going on down at the soil level and what we're doing. And you know, one of the biggest misconceptions is that when we're precision cultivating, that there are weeds, visible big ones, that we're going after. Once you get to that stage, it's too late. Now you're just pulling weeds out. And when you try to cultivate them, right, the cultivator is just going to chop it off and the roots will still be there and they'll regrow. So we're going after really small weeds, and I'm going to show you how small that we're going after. Right, so we have one over here. This is thread stage. This is the smallest one. This is barely visible. You have to get really close down. You're not going to see it standing up. And in the spring, there's going to be thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of these as you bring your cultivator, right, along those rows like that. And that's all you need to do is one movement all the way down a row, right? You know, as Elliot says, like a tractor, just straight down the rows, come back, straight again, back and forth, right? And when you're doing that, you're killing tens of thousands of that little tiny thread stage weed that I'm showing you. And then we have a medium size, right, which is right over here. That one has just a couple of leaves, but it's still barely visible. It's like just a quarter to a half inch off the soil. It's so tiny. Right? That's kind of the medium stage that you can hit when you're cultivating. That's when you're maybe a week late, right? Because you want to be doing it every week. And there will be thousands of those things. And the cultivator is either going to cut it or it's going to pull it out of the ground, and those little tiny weeds just can't survive. Once the sun hits the roots, they dry out and they're going to die immediately. Now, the biggest sort of weeds that you can get, and we're just talking about annual weeds, things that germinated this year, not grass or, you know, tap roots like dandelions. Those things are just, you know, you're not going to be able to cultivate those. It's just things that you germinate this year, right? Then we have a weed here. This is about the biggest. You see, now you can actually see this one, but it's still delicate, right? It's just producing seed right now, right? It's only 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches out of the ground, and it's already producing seed, right? Which means if these seeds mature, which is very soon, then there's going to be hundreds of little tiny seeds released, and we're going to be in the same problem that we're going to be in the same situation that we were, and we're not going to be reducing our seed bank. It's just going to get worse and worse and worse. So this is really the latest you want to be doing it. And this is going to be 2-3 weeks late, right? So you waited, you didn't do it in a week, you didn't do it in 2 weeks, now you waited 3 weeks, and this is the latest you're going to wait. And now things are going to be more difficult. The chances of you killing them all become more difficult, right? But this is still delicate, and as the cultivator comes by, and it doesn't matter which cultivator you use, right? So as the cultivator comes by, it's going to kill a weed that size because it's going to pull it out of the ground or cut it off, and then it's going to be left in the sun to die. And let's look how deep you're actually going, right? When this cultivator is in the soil, it's barely below the soil, barely there taking care of weeds. It doesn't need to be deep, don't need to dig at it. It's just barely skimming the surface and riding along and killing weeds, right? And if you have places where it's, you know, hard, right, then you use something that's really stiff, like a collinear, right? And that's going to be able to slide right on the surface. Even if you have clay, you can slide it right on the surface, and that's going to kill the weeds, right? You don't need to go deep, right? We're talking just a millimeter or less. That's all it needs to be able to kill those weeds right there, right? And that's really where this shines, is having something stiff, is in much harder soil, compacted soil. And it's also great for, getting under the lettuce heads, you see? Right? It's going to just slide right under there and get anything that's germinating underneath there, right? While something like a wire weeder is going to get in between, right? So just like that, right? So if you have spaces that are like here, it's going to fit perfectly in between two crops, right? And so you want to have, the multiple sizes to do that, right? Whatever weeder you're using, right? You can also use this, and then you can turn it to fit in between different size crops, right? It's a little harder because you have to hold it at that angle, but it is possible. So you can go from that width to about that width, right? I like to just switch them out. It makes it easier for me. But even this weeder isn't going to go very far below the surface, right? This is good for soil that has organic matter, that has been balanced, because once you balance soil, even if it's clay, when the balance is right, and I'm talking about the balance of minerals in the soil is actually going to loosen up a bit, and you're going to be able to cultivate a lot easier, right? And so once it has organic matter and it's been loosened up, then this works really, really nice. It's going to just slide right through the soil. And you say, well, there's no weeds here. Well, that's exactly what I'm explaining. You're doing it when you don't see them, because there will be. Those weeds are certainly there, and it's the easiest time to do it. It's incredibly fast. And even in your home garden, right? As long as you're planting straight, then just, run a cultivator in between your rows, along the edges of the beds, and then down the paths, right? Make sure you cover everything. You don't need to do this, right? That's not cultivating, right? It's just running it straight down the rows. And that's going to keep you weed free, and it's going to make gardening or farming much, much more enjoyable. It's going to make the quality of your crops better. It's going to make everything easier and more pleasant. And not to mention, it just makes things look really, really pretty when you don't have a lot of grass and stuff coming through. And lowers the stress. Farming is stressful enough. We don't need more stress of having weeds taking over. So at that thread stage, that tiny little weed, your best defense if you don't have vegetables in the ground yet is flame weeding, because it's the fastest, most reliable, and you can be running with a flame weeder and it's going to kill those little tiny weeds, no problem. And all you're doing is walking, right? It's incredibly easy. So always try to use that first, and then as you put the crops in, then you're going to start using the tools to cultivate the soil. Precision cultivate the soil. Very important difference.